Hey gang, welcome to Warframe University episode 2. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to mod your primaries and secondaries. I've decided to leave melee for another video. I think there's just enough differences in the mod selection, arcane selection, and gameplay stuff that is different with melee in relation to guns. I'm going to save it for the next Warframe University episode. So thank you for your patience, but I think the duration and the quality of my video would suffer, and your learning experience, because I'm trying to educate here, would suffer a lot if I included melee here. It would just be kind of a slog. Likewise, I've decided to change my format a little bit. In the last video, I presented to you all of the information and mods, and then I did a demonstration. In this video, I'm going to attempt to do both of them at the same time, except really like integrate them within each other. I think with Warframes, my last method was a little sloppy, but worked because Warframes are such a, they're not just DPS machines. There's quality of life, there's survivability, there's energy economy. Weapons are actual just DPS number factories. Like, that's all they are. You're just trying to get the highest number possible. There's like a couple of quality of life things you could debate, but nowhere near with Warframes. So here I'm going to be doing a demonstration as we mod, and I think it'll actually cut down the time of the video and increase the quality of the information and the ability to apply it to real modding. So thank you guys so much for the support. Last Warframe University videos have done so well. Thank you guys so much love. Been getting lots of subs. Please continue to do that. Likes, positive comments, and I'm going to keep pushing for you guys. I really appreciate the support and the chance you're giving me, and I'm not going to waste it, I promise. So let's get into the video. Our last mining video, all we're going to do is walk to our arsenal here. As you can see, I've got my dripped out Excalibur here. I think it'd be kind of funny if we use the same sample Excalibur over and over as often as we can, and like as we go into more episodes, just drip him out more. So I'm giving that a shot. I think it's a fun little gimmick. Anyways, first we're going to want to hit swap and equip whatever we want to mod. Of course, I've equipped the stuff ahead of time, but just letting you know, that's, I gotta do that. So the weapon I'm using for today's sample for primaries is the Netherrook. The Netherrook is acquired after the new war quest, I believe, and it's one of the best primaries in the game, in terms of how accessible it is. You get it for free, it comes with a catalyst, and realistically you could never form of this thing and it will serve you for the rest of your time in Warframe. This weapon is unbelievably strong and unbelievably important if you can get your hands on it. Note that a lot of the principles I teach you here apply to every single weapon. In terms of balancing crit and status, which is the main thing we're going to be discussing before we get into it, understand that there are very few weapons in the game that only use crit and only use status. Most weapons will use 2 to 3 status mods, 2 to 3 crit mods, some base damage. Most weapons use a balance of all mods. So let's get started with the process and see how it looks. So the first thing you want to do, even before we get into the modding menu, is you want to read this upper right hand text sometimes, because it can include the gimmicks that the weapon has. It tells you exactly what the weapon does. Ideally, if you're modding the weapon, you've used it before, so you understand any gimmicks or like playstyle things, but sometimes you just get a weapon right out of the foundry, you're excited, you want to see, kind of get an idea of what it can do before you use it. Likewise, your base stats are going to be here, and in some cases your modded stats. These base stats are important because they give us a goal for the weapon. So if we have a high base crit chance, that's really good, we're going to build a lot of crit. High base status chance, that's really good, we're going to build a lot of status. For reference, anything I would say above 25% can be made to be moddable. If a stat is below 20%, it can be really difficult to get the mods mileage, because again, the mods use that base number to determine their value. It's not impossible by any means, and Incarnate weapons, which are like late game, have given a lot of weapons a new lease on life in terms of their base stats, but just note in this case that we've got good enough stats. We're using the Netherrook today. This is a main quest weapon you acquire after a new war, quite late in the game, but it is a great weapon that can carry you throughout the rest of your Warframe career if you so choose. So we know we've got a gimmick. We know we've got a gimmick that's like a rhythm game. If we shoot at the perfect time, we get the best base stats possible. If we want to build for quick shot, we get weaker stats, but it's got, it's a quick shot, so it's got a fire faster fire rate. We can build towards that, but we're really building for the charge and the perfect shot here. That's why I mentioned the gimmicks, because you have to make sure your weapon doesn't have something weird going on. And if it does have something weird going on, maybe you could take advantage of it. Maybe you enjoy it, you think it's unique, it's quirky, it's fun. Like, we want to use, there's like 500 to 600 weapons in this game. We want to make sure we're using things that we enjoy. That's kind of the point here. So how do we start modding? Well, the number one thing is if you are on Steel Path or not. If you're not on Steel Path, I recommend that you simply add a mod called Serration for primaries and Hornet Strike for secondaries. This is what we refer to as a base damage mod. Notice when I inserted this mod, these numbers across the board, my damage numbers, just went green. All I mean, 2 of them, and then the total one as well went green. This is just an increase in your base damage, no strings attached. When you get this early game, this is going to be the first mod you're going to want to throw on, and especially when you're early game, you want to be putting ranks in it as often as you can, because it is just really strong base damage. However, if you are Steel Path, this means you've unlocked the 3 main primary arcanes. These are Primary Deadhead, Primary Dexterity, and Primary Merciless. These apply to secondaries as well, and they are of the same name. The way that these mods work is they give you ramping base damage for each kill you get, up to 360%. Notice that Serration at max rank only gives 165%. So you do get that right away right into the mission, but in this case it's just very worth it to have one of the primary mods here, or primary arcanes here rather, because it gives you just so much more base damage. Likewise, they give little upgrades as well. In the case of Merciless, and how you stack them is different per mod. Merciless is on kill, you get damage for 4 seconds, stacks up to 12 times, that is 360%. Likewise, you get reload speed, which is really helpful on a good set of weapons. Primary Deadhead, on precision headshot kill, gain 140% damage for 24 seconds, stacks up to 3, that's again 360. These all stack up to 360%. You get 2 upgrades here, plus 30% to headshot multiplier, that's why this is my favorite one, and minus 50% weapon recoil. Likewise with Dexterity, this is if you are running a melee build, maybe you're running a primary that is more suited to utility, then on melee kill you get the base damage for 20 seconds, up to 6 times, and the side grade here is 7.5 seconds of combo duration. Again, this is if you are doing a little bit of melee. So in this case, the reason you don't want to equip both generally is because damage is kind of like a cheeseburger, right? So like I'm baking a cheeseburger, and sure, I love meat, right? Yeah, I love meat, and I don't want my burger to have like all meat. I want like some cheese on there. I want some lettuce and some tomato and ketchup, whatever. I want everything to come together. The flavors multiply. If I just put a slice of beef on there, and then I put another slice of beef, and then another slice of beef. Like, sure, it's a burger, yeah, but the flavors don't get to multiply with each other. So that's kind of how my perspective on damage, without getting mathematical on you. If you want mathematical, I will probably release that in the future, but that's fundamental understanding. So, okay, how do we add, like, we've added the meat, now how do we add, so in this case, by the way, we're gonna take Serration off because we're working with Primary Merciless here, but if you're early game, I guess we can leave it on, fine. Okay, what else do we need to add here? So the first thing we want to look at is a stat called MULTISHOT, which not a lot of people are familiar with. I think people from other games can read into crit chance and status chance and understand that, but MULTISHOT's a bit unique. Likewise, MULTISHOT, normally you have this feature where you can click the base stats here and see what mods apply, which is really useful. But in this case, MULTISHOT isn't innately on our weapon, so we actually do have to search it. So hopefully DE fixes that. I think that'd be really helpful. But notice when I put the MULTISHOT on, the stat pops up here, and MULTISHOT is the number of damage instances fired per shot without consuming additional ammo. Each damage instance has its own chance to apply critical hits or status effects. So yes, MULTISHOT is effectively like the closest thing to a base damage increase without actually being a base damage increase. And with MULTISHOT, we have a couple options. And there's a couple of, for shotguns have different ones, but the main thing is we want split chamber or galvanized chamber. Galvanized mods are upgraded versions of a lot of mods that usually have a slightly lower base stat, but just like the primary arcanes here, provide a buff when you get kills and you ramp them up. They are galvanized mods, I believe in all variants, are straight up better in 99% of cases if you have them, but they are fairly end game. You unlock those with Arbiters of Hexus doing arbitrations, which are like semi-difficult late game content. Likewise, this is, I guess, a good time to segue into crit, but talking about the acuity mods. You acquire these in 1999, and all they are is weak point buffs. You cannot build any multi-shot on your weapon, or it can't be modified, I should say. So if I put primary acuity on here, notice my multi-shot gets locked at 1, despite the fact that I've put additional multi-shot on. This gives huge buffs to like weak point / headshot damage, but it means that you can't mod multi-shot, and multi-shot is really useful. So even though the acuity mods are quite good, they do take up a lot of mod drain, as you can see here, and if you don't hit the weak spots, you lose a mod slot basically, right? So that could be a problem. Multi-shot, you basically always want it's in the conversation of being effectively a base damage increase, again, while contributing to the cheeseburger analogy I gave you. Vigilante Armaments is quite a good multi-shot mod, but it doesn't really provide the value that these do. If you have a status build, multi-shot belongs in some builds, and the Vigilante set for primaries is quite good, but it's not really worth equipping here, I would say. It is also worth noting that shotguns and beam weapons usually have innately high multi-shot, which makes them really good candidates for a lot of multi-shot. Galvanized chamber, vigilante armaments will go really far on those mods, while you definitely probably wouldn't want an acuity mod on a beam weapon because they have really high built-in multi-shot, which means you should be, utilizing that base stat to deal more damage. So talking about critical chance and critical damage, we have two main mods that we're going to talk about here because they actually can't be, they're competing with each other directly. They cannot be equipped onto the same weapon, and that is critical delay, which is a corrupted mod that provides 200% critical chance at a fire rate negative of 20% because it is corrupted, and point strike, which is just a straight up 150% critical chance buff. This one is pure vibes, essentially. I mean, not really, but if your Warframe has a attack speed buff or fire rate buff, then you can just totally negate critical delay. Likewise, if you're using a weapon that is a semi-auto weapon, you can actually equip a mod called Semi-Rifle Candidate, and same applies for pistols and their equivalents, that actually makes a fire rate non-moddable, which applies so you can't buff your fire rate with mods, but likewise you cannot tank your fire rate with mods, which means critical delay on a semi-auto weapon that uses the cannonade mod is a no-brainer because you don't have to deal with the negative, you just get bonus critical chance. The other candidates here are the scope mods, which are Argon Scope and Galvanized Scope. These can actually be equipped onto the same weapon, but it does kind of follow like the cheese thing, right? Which is, again, why it's actually a good thing that point strike and critical delay cannot be equipped together, because it's just too much cheese on the burger, right? If base damage is too much burger, crit chance is too much cheese. We don't want that. We want a nice, delicious, multiplicative sandwich. But Galvanized Scope is interesting. I think it's a really underrated mod. On secondaries, I believe it's called Galvanized Crosshairs. This actually gives you stats when you headshot kill, which means that the mod is actually not reflected at all on the stat spread. So pretty underrated mod, but I really only recommend it on certain weapons. It can be a little bit difficult to get going all the time. And likewise, our acuity here gives critical chance, but only on weak point hits. Note that weak point hits or headshots are not crits. They are their own multiplier. So when you hit a crit and a headshot, those are both working together in tandem. Crits are not headshots. Critical damage is a little bit easier, like a lot of it easier. Generally, the only mod you'll ever equip for critical damage is called Vital Sense. If you have a Riven, like in this case I do, you can get some crit damage out of that, and that's for like really strong weapons that have good Riven stats. The Nadaruk is not one of those. And Hammer Shot. Hammer Shot is really good. It's kind of a flex mod. It's one of the better flex mods, but I would say you don't really have to own this mod at all. Just Vital Sense is really important, and that's it for crit damage. Also note that critical chance can surpass 100%. This is what leads to crit tiers, which is a pretty unique system to Warframe. Basically, crit tiers change colors, so like anything above 100% will be an orange crit, which is called a big critical hit. Anything above 200% crit chance is a super critical hit, and anything above that is also red, but will apply a little exclamation mark at the end of your damage number to indicate what tier of crit chance you're at. So status is where we see a lot of confusion, but I promise it's not that complicated. There's a little bit of math involved, but it's not complicated. I promise. I will teach it to you now. So status has what we call status percent chance, and then status weighting, and then damage types. So damage types are not really super significant. They basically compose your status percent, but in addition, some enemies are vulnerable to certain status types, and in the early game, this can be quite useful to get a little more mileage out of your weapon than you would normally. I will say, as a late game player, I do not consider enemy vulnerability. I mod only for specific statuses, regardless of what enemies I'm going up against. That's a personal thing. I also don't use Bane mods, which are mods that deal help you deal bonus damage to specific factions, which is essentially what the damage types are, but I do not engage with that. Again, I mod mainly for statuses and their unique effects, regardless of the enemies I'm going against. So all status chance is effectively the percentage chance that you will proc one of your statuses that is involved in your damage profile here. So here in the base Nadaruk, I've just got slash and puncture, and a 50% chance to proc either of these. And as you can see, the weighting, the number for puncture, I'm dealing more puncture damage, which means our weighting is favored towards puncture. There's a 50% chance I'm going to proc a status, 36% of that is for puncture, 14% of that is for slash. The math is fortunately done for you. I don't believe this was always the case, so that's really helpful. I'm going to go over IPS, which is impact, puncture, slash. These are the base kind of statuses that cannot actually be forced onto weapons. Weapons have to have base built-in puncture, slash, and they usually will, or impact, or they cannot be modded on. You'll see if I type impact here, the Nadaruk does not have impact damage. I use Crash Course, plus 120% impact. I put it on there, nothing happens. Nothing changes. But if I go to say Toxin, which is an elemental, and I put that on there, it will go on there. So note that about IPS. So we're going to cover what the IPSs do, and then we'll cover base elements, and then we'll cover what the combined elements do, how strong they are, when we should use them, so on and so forth. Start off impact. When it procs, you basically just stagger enemies, and you also increase the mercy kill threshold to up to 80% at max stacks. This is really important. It allows you to kill certain tanky units or support units that have pairs on mercy kill thresholds. That's like the little knife in your wrist animation that you do. Impact is not great, and luckily you won't be modding towards it. So if it's just on your gun, just consider it like a side benefit. It's not a big deal. You won't be modding for it, but it'll be in a lot of weapons base damage profiles. So it can help occasionally, but I would say don't worry about impact too much. When puncture triggers, puncture temporarily reduces the target's damage output by up to 80% and increases critical chance of damage taken by up to 25% with multiple stacks. All this is a target that you are hitting actively with puncture will deal less damage to you, and you will deal more damage to it. Very solid overall element, and again, it'll end up in, you're not going to build towards it, it'll end up in most builds as an IPS stat, so don't worry about it too much. And lastly, for the IPS slash, all slash does is it provides a bleed that goes underneath armor. So this is really strong, again, against armored targets like Grenier and Scaldra, because it basically lets you deal true damage beneath their armor, which can be very, very strong and can be amplified by other sources. Moving on to the element, the base elements, we have heat. Heat is probably the strongest single element in the entire game. All heat does is provides a heat damage proc, so DOT over time. It can stack infinitely, which is quite strong. In addition, it causes enemies to panic, so it acts as a stun and reduces their armor by up to 50%, which is very, very strong. Electricity chains between nearby enemies, temporarily applying a stun effect and dealing damage over time. This is generally going to be a lot more on command damage, so you might think that heat and electric are kind of the same, and they are pretty similar, but electricity provides a lot more instant damage and also chains between enemies, which is quite strong. Toxin damage is actually able to bypass shields, which is very, very strong against heavily shielded corpus enemies. This is similar to Slash. This is basically just Slash, but for shields. Very, very strong element, though. And combines, in terms of combination elements, Toxin is going to be the strongest. And lastly, for the basic elements, Cold causes enemies to move and attack slower for each stack and will completely freeze for 3 seconds upon reaching 10 stacks. Increases critical damage by 10% on the first stack with an additional 5% per stack, and this effect doubles when frozen. Now, note that, certain enemies cannot be frozen, especially until their overguard is removed, but usually this is going to be used for utility. The slow is incredibly useful, the freeze is incredibly useful, but note that it also does increase critical damage. So when combined with puncture, you're increasing crit chance and critical damage just purely with elements, which can be quite useful. Moving on to combined elements. Heat and electric combine to make radiation, which is probably going to be the worst status in the game, but still provides some useful crowd control. Basically, radiation causes enemies to attack each other. The more radiation stacks they have in terms of on the enemies, they will do bonus damage to one another. Heat and Toxin combine to create gas, which basically makes gas clouds that scale off of the damage you've dealt using your weapon, that expands the more stacks that you have. This is a great way to make single target weapons, provide some sort of lingering AoE utility. Overall, very underrated element, I would say. Heat and Cold combine to create Blast. Blast deals 30% of base damage after 1.5 seconds as an explosion. At 10 stacks or on death, stacks deal their damage simultaneously to enemies within 5 meters while staggering them. This is the optimal way to try to turn single target damage weapons into AoE, although it's going to ask a little bit more of you in terms of status chance and the frequency that you're applying those statuses in terms of like bullets, multi-shot, whatever. Electric and Toxin combine to make corrosive damage, which actually is a huge armor shred source, much better than what heat can provide, and this is going to be the main way that you're going to deal damage to heavily armored targets. You can only achieve up to an 80% armor strip, although there are Archon shards in the game, which are a late game thing that allow you to fully shred armor using the corrosive status chance. Cold and electric combine to make magnetic, which is a bit of a mouthful, but bear with me here. Magnetic increases shield and overguard damage by up to 325%. This is massive for taking care of priority targets and corpus. Many priority targets will have overguard on them, which is super annoying. And it disables their shield regeneration, which is quite useful for targets that when they have shield ospreys and stuff, that's mostly a corpus problem. When that shield or overguard breaks, deal electricity damage for 3% of the enemy's max shield or overguard per stack with a forced electricity status effect. This means that when you're dealing with those enemies, there's going to be a huge AoE explosion that deals like pretty okay damage, and also the electricity status effect, which I mentioned earlier, is damage that chains and also stuns. Magnetic is incredibly valuable, and it's the best element for if you have a weapon that wants to take care of priority targets. Lastly, Cold and Toxin combine to create Viral, which is a straight up damage increase. Viral damage increases damage to health, up to 325% with multiple stacks. For a short duration, that damage cap is 10 stacks. Viral is incredibly good. It is like the only straight up damage increase, and you're going to want it kind of as often as you can, especially early on, because it's just such an honest damage increase. This is helpful in combination with Slash, which isn't as strong as it used to be, but Viral, because it increases damage to health directly, Slash, like I said, deals true damage. Viral Slash is going to be a great synergy early on to deal with armored targets. So now that we know what the elements do, how do we get them onto our gun? Well, most IPS will generally be on the weapon to start, and sometimes weapons actually have starting elements as well, which are incredibly strong when you get them, although it is fairly rare. And certain weapons, like Kuva weapons, can be built in where you can kind of choose which element you want, and those are really strong, partially for that reason. So we have the main two sources are going to be what are called 60/60 mods. These mods give you 60% damage additionally as the element, and then also increase your status chance as well. These are the ones you really want. Search up how to get them on the wiki, and you will be good for this. You'll be set. These mods will go on so many weapons, it's not even funny. I suggest you find them as soon as possible. The ones you'll actually acquire pretty early on, I call, just base elemental stat mods. These are Hellfire, or Pistols, Stormbringer, stuff like that. These basically just add the damage to your profile. So when I put Stormbringer on here, you'll notice my status chance does not increase at all. But when I look at my status chance, I see there's a higher chance for me to proc electricity. This is because I increased the damage of my weapon, and I increased the electricity damage of my weapon, but I didn't actually increase my status chance. This is fine, and this adds technically more damage to my weapon than a 60/60 would. But the value of adding status chance, the value of adding, in this case, electric procs, right, will be in most cases outweighs just the raw damage. When you're building status, you're building to do the status. So keep that in mind. Some weapons, like sniper rifles, certain weapons, they rely on the base damage, and they might want it. But usually you'll still be putting the 60/60 on. Even just because you're putting one of the 90 mods on, doesn't mean you're not going to be applying a 60/60 as well. Mods will generally take up 2 to 3 slots or more of your modding capacity. So, okay. Note that, for example, combining mods is a bit weird. So we can't have, for example, gas and toxin on a build, because gas will absorb the toxin that we use. So we have to be mindful when combining, and I'll go more over that in a second, but this is why we have to be a little bit more mindful when we combine mods. One of the easiest, and I'm just going to give you a shortcut. Generally, I don't like to teach what to mod, I like to teach how to mod, but I'm going to do a little shortcut here. One of the best early game and late game combos for mods is heat and viral. These can combine because obviously viral doesn't interfere with heat, as viral is composed of toxin and cold. This is just 3 mods. I recommend using 3 60/60s when possible. This gets your status chance nice and high so that you're proccing a good amount of heat and a good amount of viral. So all we're going to do in this case is equip Malignant Force, equip Thermite Rounds. This will give us gas to start, and hit Rhyme Rounds. This will give us heat and viral. Viral will give us additional damage at subsequent shots after we proc the viral. Heat will give us the panic. It'll give us the armor strip. It'll give us that additional burn. It's just really good. This combo will carry you like forever, basically. Heat viral is really strong, but there are compelling reasons to equip a variety of elements. Just take note of what I've told you and what you think should work for your weapon. Also note that status, like crit, can also go above 100%. And will proc additional statuses for values over 100%. Alright, now time for a quick scary lecture on status ordering. So one thing that people don't really fully understand is the order that status mods go in order to combine with each other properly. The way you need to look at it is as if these little slots go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in terms of priority. So for example, if I put Malignant Force here and Thermite Rounds here, I now have created the gas. If I put Rhyme Rounds here in slot 5, it just adds cold. However, if I switch Rhyme Rounds into Thermite Rounds in slot 2, I will create viral because it goes 1, 2. These take prio over the heat here. Keep this in mind. And one thing to note is you can actually move polarities around. So as long as you formatted your weapon one time. So if mod polarity optimization is giving you some trouble, do note that if you have one format in a weapon at least, you can move the polarities around. So we've slotted in our base damage, our crit chance, multi-shot, and our elements here. I've gone for Viral Heat, which as you can see will take up 3 of our mod slots. So in some cases you only have 2 mod slots being taken up by status. In some cases you don't have the base damage here. For example, because I have Primary Merciless here, I'm not going to need this Serration, but there will be cases where I'm running Primary Crux, which is, you know, a status heavy mod, Longbow Sharp Shot, Primary Obstruct, Primary Frostbite. If you are not running the Merciless, Deadhead, or Dexterity Arcanes, you will likely need the base damage in your build, because it has to come from somewhere. So I've put in all my mods here. What's left? Well, some of the strongest options you have available to you are Hammer Shot, which I mentioned earlier. This gives you a good amount of crit damage and a good amount of status chance. This would feel great. I mean, this is just straight up good damage. However, if you don't have one of the two, I'd say Hammer Shot loses a lot of its value. Galvanized Aptitude is one of the strongest mods in the game. It's really good. This gives you status chance along with direct damage, base damage, like Serration, that works with each status affecting an enemy. This can work to varying success, but it's very, very strong, and Galvanized Aptitudes, or what some people call Gun CO, this stands for Gun Condition Overload. Condition Overload is the melee variant that achieves this effect that was released beforehand, that's why it's called that. Likewise, you could include a mod like Rifle or, you know, Secondary Pistol Elementalist, whatever it's called. This increases your status damage and gives you some punch through as a bonus. I believe on the pistol, it's a different stat. Aptitude is just more status chance, you know, so something like Cryo Rounds, or again the Hellfire I mentioned earlier, will give you access to more weighting. So for example, just to make a quick case here, I have Viral and I have Heat. Now I note that Malignant Force and Rhyme Rounds are 2 mods that are adding a little bit more value in terms of status. So I know that I'm going to be proccing Viral more than I'm proccing Heat. We don't want this, and I'm going to explain it in the least complicated way possible. Viral caps out at 10 stacks, which means this status chance starts doing a whole lot of nothing at some point. We want a lot of Heat, because it stacks infinitely. This is kind of the same with like Electricity. You want a lot of Electricity procs because it stacks infinitely. So if I were to add Hellfire into here, I could slowly increase my Heat weighting and get it up a little bit. Now with an Adderhook, it doesn't matter so much, but with certain weapons, especially status weapons that want to apply a lot of heat, make sure your weighting is in favor of the element that is giving you the most DOTs or most damage. Viral is very good and you want to get it to max stacks, but by the time you hit 10 viral stacks, you want to hit like, you know, 15, 20, 100 heat procs or electric procs. So yeah, in a lot of mods, and there's a lot of mods for this slot here. And this is where your Acuity mod could go, your Cannonade mod could go, your Vigilante Armaments, certain corrupted mods like Vile Acceleration that take your damage down but boost your fire rate by like 1 gazillion. A Riven mod. There are just so many mods that go here, and quite frankly, there's a lot of underrated mods. Galvanized Scope could go here. Hunter's Munitions is a mod that gives you slash damage when you crit. Used to be very popular. Magnetic Capacity gives you straight up magnetic damage. There's a variation on pistols that works. Primed Shred. I mean, I'm scrolling through here. There are so many options you get here with these flex slots, and I would say usually on most builds you will end up with 1 to 2 flex slots per build. That's when it's your time to express yourself, I would say. Are guns usually just DPS machines that you can optimize? Absolutely, but depending on the Warframe you're playing, that's where you get to decide. If I'm playing Harrow, I am not building attack speed. That is already in the build. Like, I'm not sweating that shit. I'm not building reload speed either. So understand that this is the point. Usually there's 1 to 2 mods in your build where it's time for you to express yourself and have fun and do what you enjoy. And in the same vein as that flex slot, we do have the infamous EXILUS slot. This is the most quality of life thing in the entire world. Ammo drum, usually they'll get ammo mutation or arrow mutation. If you're playing Avara, God bless your soul, my favorite frame, Hush will have to go in there so that you can remain invisible. Terminal velocity ends up quite good. There's multiple like projectile speed mods. Vigilante supplies, ammo conversion, vile precision, like this mod, again, I've mentioned this in the Warframe guide. This EXILUS mod can go unmodded and unlocked for the rest of your Warframe career, and you will not like notice a difference in large part. And real quick, I'm going to do a little demonstration on my secondary because the mod names can confuse people. So I take a look at my base stats. I say I've got crazy crit chance. When built towards that, 25% status chance is buildable towards, but it's not great. I got a full IPS loadout here. So let's get started. First one, base damage. In this case, I have options. I have the arcane slot I can go for, but I have a different arcane I want to use. So I can put in Hornet Strike for that base damage. Or I know I'm not going to modify my attack speed, so I'm actually going to use the Cannonade mod here, which makes it so I cannot use anything that buffs my fire rate or anything that nerfs it will not apply. So in that case, I'm going to use Creeping Bullseye. I'm just going to hit the critical chance here. I'm going to put Creeping Bullseye on because that's really good. And I'm going to give my crit chance I'm looking for in my base damage as well. Multi-shot I'm going to need as well. Unfortunately, I have to type that, so I'm going to click it. Galvanized Diffusion's going to head in there. I'm not going to use Lethal Torrent. Normally this is a very good mod, but I'm not going to use it because that fire rate will actually go in the dumpster, which we definitely don't want. In terms of elements, there are a couple things we want on this pistol. I would say Heat is going to be pretty strong. Heat Viral is an option, so we'll look for Status and Frostbite and Pistol Pestilence. Notice I've hit Blast Toxin. That's not what I want. I want Heat and Viral. So how do we do this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I explained it before. We want Viral first, so we got to combine the Toxin and the Cold first to get Viral, and then Heat on the subset there. I need critical damage as well. Got a nice little X ribbon there, that's flex. And put Prime Target Cracker in there, and the Dash Polarity. So now I've got basically everything I need. I've got Status, I've got crit damage, I've got critical chance. At this point, I can kind of throw in whatever I feel like I want. I can go into this flex slot, Merciless Gunfight. If I decide I want to punch through, Heated Charge. If I decide I want to increase that heat weighting, like I mentioned, basically whatever I want to go in there can go in there. If an Arcane, since I decided not to do base damage, I can get Conjunction Voltage. If I want to steal Overguard, I can go Secondary Fortifier, Cascadia Flare, all sorts of options. And here is my actual Lex Prime build. The mod, I don't want to mention it because it's just a little bit more advanced, but yeah, hopefully that secondary demonstration helped you out. So just to recap, how do we mod a weapon? A gun specifically, a primary or a secondary? Well, first we're going to apply our base damage, our Serration type damage. This damage is going to be acquired through Serration or Hornet Strike, or if we're post-Steel Path, we're able to use primary and secondary arcanes in order to achieve that effect. Next, Multi-Shot. Multi-Shot is going to be great on the vast variety of weapons that we have, and sometimes we will run the Acuity, but note that Multi-Shot generally is going to be your best bet. In 90% of cases, Acuity will be kind of a personal choice. That I personally like, that's if you really like red crits and like hitting weak spots, headshots. That's your playstyle. Next, crit chance and crit damage. Generally 2 to 3 mods. I would say 2, 1 crit chance, 1 crit damage mod will carry you over the finish line. But again, if you really like those red crits, you can incorporate 3 crit chance mod or 2 crit chance mods, 1 crit damage mod, and that will be balanced just enough. Remember, weak points aren't hit kills, are not crit kills. Crit and weak point are 2 separate multipliers and apply their own damage, which is really important to know. We learned what all the statuses do and how to apply them properly. So Magnetic is good for priority targets. Heat is good for general use and crowd control. We learned how to apply them using 60/60s. We learned how to weight them properly in order to get the exact element we want as frequently as possible. We learned how to check for gimmicks on weapons that might require a certain mod or ask for a certain augment of us. We learned how to properly apply Warframe abilities and external buffs onto our weapon to compensate for what our weapon normally lacks in terms of modding or just base stats. And that is going to be it, gang. Thank you guys so much for watching. Really appreciate it. If there's anything I can improve on or you really enjoyed in particular, please leave it in the comments, subscribe, like, all that good stuff. I appreciate you guys' support so much, and I will definitely see you in the next one. Again, so much love for you guys. Have a great day. Take care of yourselves, and I'll talk to you soon.